Hey everyone, 2BrainCell here, and I'm back with another video on TFT fundamentals. Today I'm going to be talking about transitioning, which is one of the most important concepts in the game right now. Because the current meta is dominated by 3 and 4 cost carries, it's very difficult for you to run the same style of composition throughout the whole game. Even if you want to run something like a Kayle or Olaf carry in the late game, it's not generally the right idea for you to hard tunnel on units that fit into those compositions from minute 1. Because transitioning is such a big topic, I decided to split it into 2 videos, and today I'm going to be talking about transitioning at level 7. Transitioning at level 7 usually comes when the game is not going very well for you. Let's say you're under 70 HP, and your board is not stable, so you don't think that it will be strong enough for you to get through stage 4 without losing way too much HP. In these sorts of situations, you have to roll a lot of your gold at level 7 in order to stabilize so that you can save enough HP and hopefully get to level 8. With the new changes to chosen rolling percentages, more specifically the chance of rolling for a 4 cost chosen going down from 5% to 2%, it's not an ideal strategy if you're trying to go for a 4 cost carry, and as such you want to aim for 3 costs. In this situation, you generally have 2 options. Either you can run a 3 cost carry into the late game, the most notable carries right now being Kennen, Sivir, and Shyvana, or you can use a 3 cost carry as a stage 4 carry until 5-1, or maybe later depending on how much gold you had to roll, where you can get to level 8 and hopefully have 20 or 30 gold to transition into a 4 cost carry board. There are obviously situations where 1-star 4 costs, namely Kayle, can be good enough for you to get through stage 4 and then hopefully get to level 8 and roll for the 2-star version of that unit. But I'm not going to talk about that today because that's effectively playing a 4 cost 8 unit carry board at level 7. Try to be as flexible as you can, and that just means because you're in a desperate situation, you might have to run a carry with some suboptimal items. And that's okay because you are in a desperate situation. You want to balance the strength of your board with being able to save as much gold as you can. And so you should just try and take whatever situation is somewhat favorable to you in the moment. Learn to judge the stability of your board, which just means to see the strength of your units in your board compared to the rest of the lobby and see whether you can get through stage 4 with minimal losses so that you can get to level 8 ASAP. And finally, one tip, if you are like me and you don't really have the mechanics to switch off your entire board in 2 seconds, is to actively switch units as you're rolling if you already know what type of composition you're going. So if you hit a 3 cost chosen that you kind of think can get you through stage 4 or maybe even into the late game, as you roll for the rest of the units, try and actively switch the units that you do hit on onto your board so that you don't get stuck in a situation where your synergies are all off and you're half transitioned into the next round, which sometimes can just result in an auto loss in a situation where you already don't want to be losing HP. So in the rest of this video, I'm going to show you some level 6 situations and level 6 boards with certain items where you might be aiming for a specific 4 cost carry, but you're not in a good HP situation. And I'll give you some options if you are put in this situation of what to try to look for at level 7 when you're rolling for stability. One more thing is that I'm going into this assuming that you have 3 impact items, so 3 items that go on your endgame carry, and 1 item that is maybe not quite as impactful, or just a tank item. So you'll see in a lot of the boards that every frontline unit has a Sunfire, because I'm just going to use the Sunfire as the quote-unquote non-impact item, and there will be 3 items on impact carries in that moment. So let's get right into it. So this right here is a pretty typical Mages board. It is, however, sometimes susceptible to losing a lot of HP in the mid game because if you don't burst the enemy team in the first rotation of your spell, sometimes your units don't get enough time or a chance to get their second rotation off. Right? So as you can see, Annie has the non-impactful item, the Sunfire, and the TF has Jewel Gauntlet, Hand of Justice, and Gunblade. And so this screams to most people an Aurelion Soul Gang. But if you are in a situation where you're under 70 HP, you're level 6, and you do have the gold, but you don't feel like this board, especially relative to the rest of the lobby, is stable enough for you to get to level 8 and roll for an Aurelion Soul, there are a couple options that you can look for from this spot. So the first and one of the more standard options in this spot is to just go for a Nico build. And Nico builds right now revolve around Mystics and Vanguards. So if you get to level 7 in this situation and you decide you want to go for a Nico build, the ideal is to get a 2-star Nico as well as a 2-star Nautilus during your roll down, right? And having these 2 units 2-starred with the items that I had just shown is probably good enough to get you through stage 4 and potentially even be your endgame composition. One caveat to this is that if you do go for Nico, it's sometimes difficult to transition out of Nico. So once you decide to go for Nico as a composition, it's very difficult for you to return to maybe an Aurelion Soul build. But in this situation, you want to get a 2-star Nico, a 2-star Nautilus, like I said, and then you want to fill out the rest of the composition with Mystics and Vanguards. And that could be any variation depending on which chosen you get. For now, let's just look at a Vanguard chosen variation where you get 6 Vanguards and 2 Mystics. So let's just put in some Vanguards and some Mystics. Let's say you also roll and high roll and get a Aatrox. So let's say you have this board. This board, especially with the items that were just shown, which is going to be Sunfire on the Nautilus, as well as the Hand of Justice, the Jewel Gauntlet, and the Gunblade on the Nico, is a very strong mid-game board, or mid to late game board. This board can definitely carry you to a top 4 finish if you end up hitting the right units, especially fabled synergy, and will definitely stabilize you through that stage 4 spot, right? And so as you're rolling down on level 7, this could be a board that you're looking to if your initial plan was to play Aurelion Soul. One other board that is a little bit not typical is a Darius chosen board. And so if you're rolling down on level 7 and you find yourself in a situation where you don't see any Nikos and you don't see too many Vanguards or whatnot, but you somehow get a Darius chosen, these items are actually more than adequate for you to run a 2-star Darius Slayers build. And so that composition looks something like this. With Slayers in, let's say you don't get a 4-cost Slayer because you're unlucky, and you run something like this, right? So this is level 6. Let's say you keep the Vanguards, you still get an Aatrox because you're lucky in that sense, and maybe you get some Mystics in. So this board right here, with the items that we were just talking about, the Jewel Gauntlet, the Hand of Justice, and the Gunblade, is actually a very stable board, provided that you get the Darius chosen. And so this should also be an option that you're looking at when you're doing the roll down and you see something like a Darius chosen. Obviously, this board doesn't transition as well into the late game when things become tankier. And so if you don't 3-star your Darius, which is obviously an option, you should look to get to level 8 with this board. And then maybe try and make another big transition into Aurelion Soul. But this is an option. Let's look at another board. So this board is pretty typical in terms of a Kayle prepped board. In this sort of situation where you have what is quote-unquote the best in slot Kayle items, it's sometimes difficult for you to see anything besides Kayle in this situation. However, if you are losing a lot of HP, it's very difficult to get a Kayle and try to transition into Kayle from this position. So one option that you can go for is if you get a Kalista chosen. This is actually these are actually very solid items for Kalista, and depending on whether you get a cultist or duelist chosen, you can run a variation of 6 cultists with 2 duelists, or maybe 4 duelists with 3 cultists with a Vanguard frontline in order to stabilize. So one example board, for example, if you get a cultist chosen from this spot, is to run 6 cultists. So 6 cultists board with Kalista as a carry generally looks something like this. You want the Jackson to provide the duelist synergy, and then you want to run 6 cultists. So you're currently at 3. Let's say you get Sivir for the attack speed, which is very strong. Where's Sivir? Sivir's here. You get Sivir. Let's say you get lucky, you get an Aatrox. You have an Elise. And maybe you're able to get keepers like this, right? And so this is a level 7 board that is actually quite strong and will allow you to get to level 8 in a stable position. Now, obviously, it's very difficult to transition back into a kill board from this spot, especially because a lot of these units are pretty expensive. So you can run this build into level 8 and potentially get a Kalista 3 or econ back up so that you can roll for kill later, at a level 8 transition. But this is one option, especially with the items which were Rageblade, Rageblade, RFC, and QS, right? And so this is a very strong composition for your level 7 roll down if you happen to get it. One other option that you can run with these items, though it's a little bit suboptimal, is to run if you get a Akali chosen carry, right? So Akali does very well with RFC because it gives her the range, it makes it so she doesn't have to walk up, right? And you can run a board with Akali, and you can run a pretty typical Assassin's Spirit board. So let's just take a look at that right now. So let's say you get the Spirits with a Assassin chosen, and you slot a let's say you slot a Diana in here. Sorry. And so this is just the basic setup for your board, and you already achieved it with 4 units. So from this point, you can either go another 2 spirits for 4 assassins and 2 spirits. If you get lucky and you roll enough assassins, you can run something like Katarina and Talon. Katarina and, if you get lucky, and a Talon, so that you can get 6 assassins really early on, right? And this is a very strong mid-game board as well, and it only revolves around Akali having the rapid fire cannon. So if you do get something like a blue buff, that's very good. If you get something like an IE, that's very good. And QS also works very well on her, right? And so when you're in a situation where you're a little bit tunneled towards Kale in the early game because you got an early RFC, but the mid game sees you losing a lot of HP, this is one option that you can go for as well. Moving on to our third board, let's say you got a Yasuo chosen early on and you're using it as a Olaf item holder. This is not a bad board, but it is definitely susceptible to losing some early rounds, especially if the enemy is running a lot of vanguards. And so imagine you're in a situation where you are running this board, you get to level 7, but your HP situation isn't good, and you can't really see any other options besides Olaf. Well, in this sort of situation, Kalista is again a very good transitional unit, especially if you hit Duelist Kalista, because it slots in 1-to-1 perfectly in this sort of setup. So if you just swap out Duelist Kalista with the Yasuo chosen, it's actually extremely strong and allows you to save a lot of gold. And in this sort of situation, maybe especially if it's a Duelist chosen, maybe you can put in another Enlightened unit, maybe you can put in another Divine unit, but effectively this will be the core of your board, and it allows you to save enough gold such that you can maybe get to level 8 at a very reasonable time and allow yourself to roll for an Olaf carry in the late game. One other option that you have in this sort of situation with these items is if you hit a Shyvana carry, or a Shyvana chosen. So with a Shyvana chosen, the transition is a lot more difficult because there are almost no overlaps in terms of units. With Shyvana chosen and Shyvana carry in general, there are generally 2 types of builds you can go for. Either you can go for 6 Dragon Soul, or you can go for a 6 Brawler Dragon Soul or 8 Brawler board. Assuming you don't roll a set on level 7, you can't really get to 8 Brawlers. So let's look at the 6 Brawler setup and the 6 Dragon Soul setup. So with Brawler chosen Shyvana, the 6 Brawler setup is a little bit more favorable because it becomes a lot more difficult for you to get a 6 Dragon Soul set without rolling an Olaf or rolling for an Ace Soul this early on. So the board looks something like this. if you have the brawler chosen, then you only need 5 other brawlers, which are shown right here. And your best bet at level 7 is to also include 2 Dragon Soul units, putting them in the back row in the corner so that Shyvana is the one who gets the procs early, right? And in this sort of situation, you want something like this as your setup with Hurricane, Hodge, and GA, and potentially the Sunfire on the Nunu, or whichever unit is really the tankiest. And this is a really strong board in the early to mid game. It's sometimes difficult for you to win lobbies with this board, especially in the late game where people hit their premier 4-cost carries. But this board is extremely strong and more than good enough to get you through stage 4. If you roll a Shyvana 3-cost, you can even use this as your endgame board, potentially with either a brawler and going to level 9 with 2 Dragon Soul. The other option with Shyvana chosen is if you get Dragon Soul, in which case you might want to go for a 6 Dragon Soul setup. So with a 6 Dragon Soul setup, sometimes the transitioning is a little bit difficult because you are rolling for at least 1 4-cost unit. So in this situation, maybe an Aurelion Soul or maybe a Olaf is good. Is your best bet, but you have to hit one of the 2 in order to get this sort of setup. So in this situation, you generally want a little bit more frontline because, as you can see, you don't really have a ton of frontline in this situation. What I find I like to run is something like another Vanguard to give Vanguard synergy, and maybe another Brawler just to give a Shyvana a little bit more inherent tankiness. And running this board is actually extremely strong because it allows you a lot of burst damage in the mid game through stage 4. And potentially into early stage 5, which can change the fight quite a bit with how much burst comes out of Dragon Soul builds. So these are 2 options that you can go for if you are running a Olaf setup board. Let's look at our final board. These items have gone up a lot in popularity recently due to the rise in Sivir and Kennen builds, and this is one of the few level 6 boards that really incentivizes you to roll at level 7 because you want to try and hit a premium 3-cost chosen like a Kennen with Keeper or a Sivir with Sharpshooter. And in addition, obviously these items can also go into a Enlightened Morgana and Talon build very well. And so if you are in a situation where your HP is good and you see other people in your lobby gearing up to go Kennen or Sivir, I would just sack a few rounds, get to level 8, and then roll for the Enlightened Morgana Talon build. But however, we're in a theoretical situation where we don't have that option, and so we have to roll. There are generally 2 to 3 variations of Kennen and Sivir builds, and one of them even includes the 2 of them together. But let's first take a look at just a purely Kennen-centric build. So Kennen-centric builds revolve around getting a Kennen early, as well as several keepers in order to shield him so that he can get at least 2 ult casts off during a fight. And so the build looks something like this. You do have to, or not have to, but it's very, very strong to get an Aatrox early because Aatrox pulls backline carries like Aurelion Soul and KO into the Kennen ultimate, which is absolutely game-changing in a lot of scenarios. To top it off, you want to run something like Mystics, or Mystics is generally your best bet in this situation where, for example, you didn't get a Keeper Kennen. If you did get a Keeper Kennen, obviously you can run Xayah, and we can also look at a situation where you do get lucky and you roll Xayah early, right, and you're able to get something like this early on. And so in this sort of situation, you want to be able to stack your Kennen with Morello and GA, these 2 being the 2 most core items on the Kennen. And then the Last Whisper is in an awkward spot because even though it's okay on Xayah doesn't really auto attack fast enough to get the Last Whisper. But while it's a suboptimal item, or item on Xayah, it still works, and you should definitely put it on Xayah in this particular situation. And so the idea with this build, of course, is to try and get Kennen at least 2 ult casts off. And if you do that, you'll win a lot of stage 4 mid-game fights. Now, in a situation where you get both Sivir and Kennen, so let's take out let's say you do get a Kennen chosen, but you get a Sivir 2-star as well. And so we're in a situation where we have 4 keepers, but we also can include the Sivir with sharpshooter, and Sivir with sharpshooter if you put in the Teemo, as well as the spirit trait. And this allows for a lot more balanced of a fight compared to the previous build. The previous build was very burst oriented, and so if Kennen doesn't kill the majority of the units within his first and second ultimate cast, you're probably going to lose the fight because there's not a lot of residual damage coming from your team. However, if you're in this situation where you have a Sivir with Last Whisper, the Keeper buff helps to protect the Sivir, and the Kennen burst and CC allow Sivir to potentially free hit for a lot of the fight. And so this will allow for a Sivir to do a lot of consistent damage throughout the fight. And so these are 2 of the variations that you generally want to look for if you have this sort of item setup going into level 7 in a bad HP spot. So this has been my video on transitioning on level 7. I will come out with another video about transitioning on level 8. Thank you all for watching, and see you soon.